Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and get hard. No poem, play, or song can fully right a wrong inflicted and endured, because history says don't hope on this side of the grave. But once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history run. That's a nice poem, isn't it? That's Seamus Heaney. That's a Curate Troy. No, you've definitely heard that one before. That's been invoked by many politicians. And always in moments of great historic significance. But, I think it's an ordinary poem about ordinary people and ordinary acts of kindness. Kindness and forgiveness. That is what we will speak of today. If I was to show you a chart of human-generated carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution, forgive me, I'm not an artist, it would look something like this. Forgive the ink thing in the middle. I don't know what happened there. But it would begin with a rise, sharp rise, to the 19th and 20th centuries, into the 21st century, stabilizing around the 2030s, 2040s, the time we call peak carbon, and then quite rapidly dropping down, and then we reach here, global actual net zero, or practical net zero, or whatever we're calling it now, 2071. Okay, so that's where we are. Now, between the period we call climate stabilization and now, there has been somewhat of a debate about the issue of climate justice. And because today we're at the Institute for Climate Justice, I think that's a good place to start. So what is climate justice? I've just used politicized language, and I apologize. I hate to do that to you, but it's important, I think, to go there. What did it used to mean? Climate justice used to mean, well, correcting the injustices caused by climate change, systemic problems, Something you'd say to sound smart at a party. But now it refers overwhelmingly to ecocide. That is the criminal code established around acts of environmental destruction and the treatment of climate criminals, who are defined by the United Nations as groups or individuals who legislated for, profited from, or otherwise enabled acts of extreme environmental destruction. Okay? So where does that leave us? If we were to assume that there are two forms of climate justice, and that is a huge oversimplification, by the way, real oversimplification of a very complex issue, but for the purposes of today, we'll assume that there are only two: punitive, restorative. Now, we're all familiar with this one, the punitive type of climate justice. When you imagine climate justice, you probably think of large-scale courts, criminal proceedings set up with grand juries where we haul these CEOs and politicians and all those lobbyists and put them all in jail. Or in countries that don't have human rights, the death penalty. And we forget, don't we, that this form of punitive climate justice has its origins in Scotland. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Aberdeen trials in 2045, or the Donnelly inquiry shortly afterwards. These were early proto-punitive measures of climate justice. And while we didn't adopt them here, they were certainly adopted enthusiastically by other countries. But we're not going to talk about that because that is the topic for another discussion. Today, I want to talk about the other kind of climate justice, restorative. And there are so many differences, I think, between them, from focusing on the collective act over the individual. Like a restorative model will break up large corporations that are guilty of ecocide and high levels of carbon emissions, right? It will dismantle political power systems that upheld that economic order of growth-based consumer orientation. You know the kind that was prevalent in the early 21st century. And no one goes to jail. Nobody goes to prison as a climate criminal. In fact, everyone is forgiven. Now that is a controversial idea, isn't it? That let the crime of climate change go unanswered. And if you think that that is a radical idea, then I encourage you to imagine 20 years ago when the Charter was first proposed at COP26 in 2051. I want you to imagine that you're sitting on the beach in the northeast somewhere, and you're looking out at the ocean, and the whole North Sea is just dying. The collapse of biodiversity hits this part of the world very hard. The stink of death runs from Denmark to Aberdeen to Svalbard. There is nothing kind or forgiving in a mass extinction, in ocean acidification. Crossing those boundaries for planetary life, well, that changes your legislative code very quickly. We forget as well, our pace has to match that of nature. Climate change doesn't wait or debate or sit around and talk about plans, does it? It takes action, kills, with discrimination. The poorest, the most vulnerable, the global dispossessed who lived and died by our decisions, by our climate conferences. And so for that alone, they had to be punished, surely. They had to be held to account in some form, punitive, restorative. That's our question. As some people wrongfully mischaracterize it, to punish or to forgive. Now let us interrogate that for a minute, because this is not some easy get out of jail free card. No. It's a forgiveness that is earned. Their wealth is still redistributed. Their power is still broken. But I can tell, you don't even have to say it. It's not the same. Because they're not hurt enough, are they? It's not enough to say you're sorry. This kind of forgiveness, amnesty, legislated amnesty, didn't just drop out of the sky one day. It didn't just appear in 2051. It's been with us forever. I like to think of forgiveness as a theme of human history. As part of who we are. And we can look at recent history, somewhat recent history, Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement, or how about South Africa, post-apartheid, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. These are examples of whole societies going, I forgive you, even though you've hurt me, I forgive you. Doesn't that take courage? Isn't that an act of bravery to say, even though you've hurt me, I'm willing to move on from this? Where punitive systems have fallen out of favor to be replaced by amnesty-based systems of climate justice, we've seen the rise of a new kind of terrorist, a new kind of vigilante, a climate retributionist. Now, I don't know if you watch the news. I try not to watch the news, to be honest. It's bad for your health, I think, to watch too much. But I did see one story about a man who was shot dead in Stockholm in the middle of the street, in the middle of the day. I mean, that's not really the shocking part, the most shocking part about it. The people that did it didn't attempt to hide it. They didn't run away. They were proud of what they'd done. They declared this man was a climate criminal, that he had worked for a major oil company, I won't say which one. And perhaps a person does deserve that then, if they did that, if they truly were a climate criminal. Perhaps you think like them, but it doesn't matter because they killed the wrong person. a case of mistaken identity on the part of a gunman, climate criminals often take second identities, new identities after forgiveness. It helps with the reintegration into civilian life. And so a man is dead, an innocent man, the wrong man. But you see now how an act of love, simple act of love, can give way to an act of hate, and how a cycle of violence can begin. And you see now why amnesty matters. Because you cannot have a future without forgiveness. That's what they say. It's very difficult to forgive. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I think we're very, very comfortable with the idea of punitive justice because it helps us forget. Much easier, isn't it, to imprison a person, or not to put too fine of a point on it, to kill a person, rather than the ideas that formed them. And it makes us feel good to hold others at arm's length and say, they are not like us. We would not make those decisions. And we say that with such confidence. So the process goes like this. You appear before the United Nations, they summon you, it has the power of extradition, it's backed in law by, I think, 127 different countries. Almost everybody takes the path of deposition. It is, after all, the path of least resistance. So you go to the United Nations building, it's the one in New York, you know the one, it looks like this. Lots of flags. And you speak for, it could be a couple hours or it could be a few days, but it's sometimes in private, but sometimes it's televised, and always they anonymize the testimony afterwards. And they do that for scholars like me to look at. So history can remember what was said and remember the acts that were done, and then we can forgive them. And I wouldn't recommend reading those files, by the way. The testimonies, they're grim. And if you're anything like me, they'll just make you sad. They'll make you sad, and then, well, they'll make you pretty angry, actually. How am I to look at these people who did this to the world? Who knew what they did, who lit the world on fire for money, and say, it's okay, don't worry about it, I forgive you. We have to reconcile between the human urge for revenge and our capacity to forgive. I don't know what the word for it is, do you? More human, more evolved? Because one has to win out over the other. And no document can tell you how to feel. It's important, though, to remember, isn't it? The long arc of history, the progress that we make, that a healing process, no matter how violent or flawed, is still better sometimes than none at all. For every Northern Ireland, for every South Africa, as flawed and difficult and painful as those processes were and are, we have many other places in this world where no healing would take place, where pain would persist, passed down between generations like an unresolved climate crisis. We have a Kosovo or a Palestine, places where hate grew and was never resolved. And so is that our choice? Between a world that refuses to let go, or a world that just struggles with the idea of letting go? I don't know. I think we have to think about this in a real way. You and I are capable of good things, but also terrible, evil things. And I think it's up to the soul to decide who we are. If you believe in a soul, I don't know you, maybe you do. Maybe you believe in a spirit, or energy, or karma, or I don't know, the fucking force, or something, anything. Just the idea that there's more to it than just this. Just us, walking around, because what was the point in saving the world if we don't have a responsibility to each other as well? And what is the point of building a new world if our first act in it as citizens is to hurt people, not in an abstract way, but in a real way? People that you know. I mean, God, it was Jesus who said that we should love our enemies. That is radical. That is a radical idea, isn't it? Love your enemies. Forgive those who persecute you. I mean, try telling people that. But why shouldn't we explore the idea of faith? I'm not asking you to convert or anything. I'm just saying the idea of faith, of belief in something. Because that's what this is about. It's about belief in, each other, belief in the earth. I mean, it was Pope Francis who wrote in the text Laudato Si that Christians have a common sense of purpose with environmentalists. That it is the same mission, really, the protection of God's creation as they see it. The Quran says that we must reject human greed and find a natural equilibrium with the earth. It was written many years ago now at the Paris COP26 treaty that Hindus have a dharmic duty to safeguard the planet's natural resources. And the 14th Dalai Lama once joked that world leaders should be locked in a room with carbon dioxide until they figure out how urgent the situation really is. This is not some secular, privileged little interest. It's not a hobby, is it? Because it took the whole world to act. And we did. And we are still trying. We made a promise, 1.5. That's what we said. We told each other 2.2. That's the latest estimate. And they say 3 degrees by the end of the century, and we don't know if it'll get worse. We just have to be realistic. But it's not people like you and me who pay the price ultimately, not really. It's those who have nothing, who come from nothing. Did we ask them? Did we say, will you tell us what justice looks like to you? No, we didn't do that. We decided for them. That's what this is. Charter for Climate Amnesty. That's what this is. A decision taken for them. So go on, ask yourself, what does justice, climate justice, what does that look like to someone who has nothing? Go to what's left of Bangladesh and ask them. Well, you won't do that, will you? Does it look like money? Is it that simple? Will money bring back their homes now submerged below the ocean? Will it bring back their families or their lives? No. Blood, then. Blood will set this right. Of course. Why didn't we think of that first? Of course, because it's the oldest law, isn't it? An eye for an eye. Always worked, always has, always will. But you know that just because something is catharsis doesn't mean it's justice. Just because it feels good doesn't mean it's right. Just because it scratches an animal instinct in your brain doesn't mean that you have done something wrong to a living being. It comes back to that idea. Is it ever wrong to forgive someone? Yes. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we should just forgive everyone all the time of everything they always do. No. Some actions are unforgivable. Actions. Action is not people. In time, I like to think that a person can change. That with contrition, I don't know. Was this a mistake? This document? Was forgiveness for these people a mistake? Go on. I'm interested in what you think, so tell me. Hands up. Was forgiveness for climate criminals a mistake? What does it say about us that we can't articulate an answer? I can't tell you how to think or what to feel, but I'll tell you this. I know it's a beautiful thing to be forgiven. Have you ever been forgiven for something? It feels like a second chance. And for these people, it must feel like a second chance to live. It's beautiful. That I can walk out of a place of darkness into the light and to feel an invisible connection between us. It's a gift. I've given you a little gift, actually. Under your seats there, you'll see that, just you can go and reach down and get it. It's a little something. So you can see that. And if you look at it in the right light, you might see the little parts of it that kept it alive, that carried life from its root to its ends. And I always think the leaves are so beautiful this time of year. And it came from a tree. Obviously it came from a tree. I mean, where else do leaves come from? So it came from a tree, but I think it's still important because, well, it's us, isn't it? It's you, and it's me, and it's everyone in this building, and in this street, and in this city, and in this country, and the world. It's all of us. You know, we all come from the same place. And we all have a responsibility to each other because we grow together and we fall together. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. Call miracles self-healing, the utter self-revealing. Don't take a feeling. If there is fire in the mountain and lightning and storm and a God speaks from the sky, it means that someone, somewhere is hearing the outcry and the birth cry of a new life at its turn. It means that for once in a lifetime that justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. Thank you.